The rifle barrel pressed against Hannah Garrett's shoulder felt as natural as breathing. And when the rattlesnake coiled 6 feet from her garden patch, struck at empty air instead of her boot, she knew her aim had been true. She lowered the Winchester and wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a smudge of Texas dust across her forehead. The June heat in Presidio was merciless, shimmering off the desert floor like water that would never quench a man's thirst. But Hannah had learned to stop minding it 3 years ago when she'd buried her father and claimed this patch of stubborn earth as her own. She was dragging the dead snake away from her struggling tomato plants when she heard the horse approaching. Hannah didn't bother looking up right away. Travelers passed through often enough, usually heading toward the Rio Grande or away from whatever trouble they'd found on the Mexican side. She had learned that minding her own business kept her alive, and that was a lesson worth remembering in 1884, when a woman alone attracted either pity or predation, and she had no use for either. "That's some shooting, miss," a voice called out, warm and deep like whiskey poured slow. Hannah straightened and turned, one hand still holding the snake's rattling tail, the other resting casual like on the rifle she'd propped against her hip. The man sat easy in his saddle, a tall drink of water with shoulders broad enough to block out a decent portion of the sun. His hat was pushed back just enough that she could see his face. All strong lines and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same stubborn rock that made up the Chinati Mountains in the distance. His eyes were the color of a storm rolling in, gray-blue and steady, taking her measure the same way she was taking his. "Wasn't trying to impress anybody," Hannah said, her voice flat and unbothered. "Just keeping my garden safe." He smiled, just a slight quirk of his lips that somehow transformed his entire face from merely handsome to something that made her pulse kick up a notch before she could tell it to settle down. "Didn't figure you were. Name's Isaiah Sullivan. I'm passing through, looking for work. Heard in town there might be ranches hiring." "Then you heard wrong," Hannah said, turning back to her garden. "Most of the big spreads already got their hands for summer. You might try the Rockingham about 15 miles north, but I wouldn't hold my breath." She could feel him still sitting there, watching her. Hannah tossed the snake into a bucket and wiped her hands on her work pants, the ones she'd cut down from her father's old clothes because skirts were a fool's garment for ranch work. When she looked back, Isaiah Sullivan was still there, and now he was studying her property with the kind of attention that made her hackles rise. "This your place?" he asked. "Every inch of it. That's a lot of land for one person to manage." Hannah crossed her arms over her chest, rifle still cradled in the crook of her elbow. "I manage just fine. I can see that." He gestured to the neat rows of her garden, the repaired fence posts, the small barn that might have been leaning a bit to the left but was still standing strong. "Wasn't suggesting otherwise, just making an observation. Your observations aren't needed, and neither is whatever help you're about to offer." Hannah's voice carried the kind of steel that had been forged through 3 years of men thinking she needed saving, needed guidance, needed a strong hand to tell her what to do with her own land. "I appreciate you stopping by, but I don't need a ranch hand, don't need a partner, and definitely don't need rescuing." Isaiah Sullivan had the audacity to look amused. "Madam, I don't recall offering to rescue you. They never do at first. It always starts with offering to fix a fence or mend a roof. And then suddenly, they're making decisions about my stock and my water rights, and acting like I should be grateful they showed up to save me from my own incompetence. Sounds like you've had some experience with that." "More than I care to remember." Hannah softened her stance just slightly, because he hadn't actually done anything wrong except exist in her space, and her father had raised her to be fair even when she was being firm. "Look," I'm sure you're a decent man, Mr. Sullivan, but I'm not interested in help, company, or anything else you might be offering. There's a town 6 miles that way if you need supplies or a place to sleep." He nodded slowly, gathering his reins. For a moment, Hannah thought that would be the end of it, that he'd ride off and become just another face in the stream of drifters and cowboys who passed through Presidio County without leaving a mark. But then he tipped his hat to her, that smile playing at the corners of his mouth again, and said, "I'll keep that in mind, Miss Garrett. You take care now." The fact that he knew her name shouldn't have surprised her. Presidio was small enough that everybody knew everybody else's business, and a woman ranching alone was notable enough to be talked about. What did surprise her was the way he'd said it, respectful and warm, without a trace of the condescension she'd grown accustomed to hearing from men who thought her situation was either pitiful or scandalous. She watched him ride away, his horse kicking up small clouds of dust that hung in the still air like ghosts. Then she shook her head, dismissed him from her thoughts, and went back to the never-ending work of keeping her ranch alive. Except Isaiah Sullivan didn't stay dismissed. 2 days later, she found him camped about a quarter-mile from her property line, right where the creek that fed her land bubbled up from underground and created a small oasis of cottonwood trees. Hannah rode up on her paint mare, irritation simmering in her chest like a pot about to boil over. "This is still my land," she called out as she approached his camp. Isaiah looked up from the fire he was building, completely unbothered by her tone. "Actually, this is federal land. Check the survey maps in town. Your property line ends about 50 yards that way." He pointed east, and damn him if he wasn't exactly right. Hannah dismounted, ground tying her mare with practiced ease. "Why are you still here?" "Because I haven't found work yet, and this is a nice spot to camp while I keep looking." He went back to arranging his kindling, his movements efficient and sure. "Got water, shade, and a pretty view of the mountains. Can't ask for much more than that. There's nothing coincidental about you camping right next to my property. Didn't say there was." He struck a match and held it to the kindling, nursing the small flame until it caught and began to grow. "I figure you might change your mind about needing help. I won't. Maybe not. But I've got time, and this spot suits me just fine while I wait." The sheer audacity of it stole her words for a moment. Hannah stared at him, this stranger who had decided that her clearly stated wishes were somehow negotiable, and felt her temper rise hot and fast. "I told you I didn't need rescuing, and I heard you." Isaiah sat back on his heels and looked up at her, his expression calm and infuriatingly patient. "I'm not here to rescue you, Miss Garrett. I'm just here. What you do with that is entirely up to you. What I'm going to do is ask you one more time to move along. And I'm going to respectfully decline. This is public land, and I've got as much right to be here as anyone else." He pulled out a battered coffee pot and began filling it from the creek. "But I promise I won't set foot on your property without an invitation. Scout's honor." Hannah wanted to argue, wanted to find some legal recourse or threat that would make him leave, but the truth was he was right. If he was on federal land, she had no authority to make him go. And something in his manner, the quiet determination mixed with genuine respect for her boundaries, took the edge off her anger and replaced it with something closer to confusion. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why do this? There's work all over Texas. Why sit here waiting for someone who's already told you no?" Isaiah poured water into his coffee pot and set it on the fire before answering. "You ever get a feeling about something? Not logical, not even necessarily smart, but just a bone-deep certainty that you're supposed to be exactly where you are. That's the worst excuse I've ever heard." He laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes and showed teeth that were surprisingly straight. Probably is. But it's the only one I've got. I saw you shoot that rattlesnake, saw the way you hold yourself like you're ready for the world to take a swing at you, and I thought, that's someone who's been fighting alone for too long. Maybe I can't help, and maybe you don't want me to, but I figure it doesn't hurt for you to know someone's nearby. Just in case. Just in case what? Just in case you change your mind. Or just in case trouble comes calling and you decide you wouldn't mind another gun nearby. Or just in case you get lonely and want someone to talk to who isn't a horse or a chicken. He shrugged, unfolding his long frame to stand. I'm not here to push, Miss Garrett. I'm just here. Hannah looked at him for a long moment. This strange cowboy with his storm-colored eyes and his stubborn patience. Part of her wanted to stay angry, to hold onto the righteous fury that had kept her safe and independent for 3 hard years. But another part, a part she tried to ignore, recognized the loneliness in his words because it echoed her own. Suit yourself, she said finally, mounting her mare in one smooth motion. But don't expect me to feed you or entertain you or acknowledge your existence. You want to waste your time camping out here. That's your business. Appreciated, madam. She rode away without looking back, but she could feel his eyes on her until she crested the small rise that hid his camp from view. The days that followed fell into a strange rhythm. Hannah went about her work with the same determined efficiency she always had, mending fences and tending livestock and coaxing life from soil that wanted to be dust. And Isaiah Sullivan stayed in his camp by the creek, occasionally riding into town for supplies or to ask after work, but always returning to the same spot just beyond her property line. She told herself she didn't notice him. She told herself it didn't matter. But she couldn't help observing the small ways he made his presence felt. The way he'd position himself between her property and the road when riders passed through, casual but watchful. The way he'd ride his fence line on the far side of the creek, not touching anything but making sure nothing was amiss. The way he'd nod respectfully when their paths crossed, but never tried to engage her in conversation unless she spoke first. It was infuriating. It was confusing. And if Hannah was being honest with herself in the quiet hours after sunset, it was also something uncomfortably close to comforting. 2 weeks into this bizarre standoff, Hannah's prize bull got loose. She discovered it at dawn when she went to check on her small herd and found the gate to the bullpen standing open, the heavy iron latch somehow undone. Her heart sank immediately. That bull represented a significant portion of her breeding program, and more importantly, her investment for the future. Without him, she'd have to borrow a bull from one of the neighboring ranches, which meant owing favors she couldn't afford to owe. She saddled her mare before the sun had fully cleared the horizon, tracking the bull's distinctive hoofprints through the soft earth near the water trough. The tracks led north, away from the creek and into the rougher country where arroyos cut through the landscape like scars. Hannah followed grimly, knowing that every minute the bull was loose was another minute he could injure himself or wander so far she'd never find him. She'd been tracking for almost 2 hours when she heard the bellowing. Following the sound, she found her bull at the bottom of a shallow arroyo, not hurt but definitely trapped. The sides were too steep and unstable for him to climb out, and he was working himself into an increasing state of agitation that was only making things worse. Hannah sat on her mare and assessed the situation with a sinking feeling. She could probably build a ramp of sorts, given enough time and materials, but she'd need ropes, lumber, and most critically, another person to help guide the bull while she worked the mechanics of getting him out. The nearest ranch was miles away, and by the time she rode there and back, the bull might have injured himself trying to escape. Need a hand. She didn't jump, though it was a near thing. Isaiah had appeared on the opposite rim of the arroyo, his horse standing patient while he surveyed the trapped bull. "How did you know I was out here?" Hannah asked instead of answering his question. "Saw you ride out early, figured something was wrong, tracked you here." He dismounted and walked his horse down to where she sat. "That's a fine-looking bull. Would be a shame if he hurt himself trying to get out of there." Hannah wanted to refuse his help. Every stubborn bone in her body demanded she send him away and solve this problem herself, the way she'd solved every other problem for 3 years. But she also wasn't a fool, and she knew when practicality had to outweigh pride. "I need to build a ramp," she said, her voice tight. "If you've got rope in your kit, we could rig a pulley system that might make it easier." Isaiah smiled, but it wasn't mocking or superior. It was just pleased, like she'd given him a gift instead of a grudging concession to reality. "I've got rope and some ideas. Let's see what we can do." They worked together in the growing heat, and Hannah had to admit that Isaiah knew what he was doing. He didn't try to take over or act like her ideas were foolish. Instead, he listened when she explained her plan, offered suggestions that actually improved it, and followed her lead when she made decisions about how to proceed. Together, they built a reinforced ramp using dead wood from the surrounding area, rigged a rope system that would help guide the bull without spooking him further, and carefully, patiently coaxed the anxious animal up and out of the arroyo. By the time the bull was free, and they were leading him back toward her ranch, the sun was directly overhead, and Hannah was drenched in sweat. Her arms ached from hauling timber and wrestling rope, and she was fairly certain she'd bruised her shin at some point, but the bull was safe, and that was what mattered. "Thank you," she said when they reached her property line, and the bull pen she'd already checked and secured. "I couldn't have done that alone." "Yes, you could have," Isaiah said, surprising her. "It would have taken longer and been harder, but you'd have figured it out. You're that kind of person." "What kind of person is that? The kind who doesn't quit?" "The kind who does what needs doing, no matter what." He paused, then added, "The kind worth waiting around for." Hannah felt heat rise in her face that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "You're very persistent, Mr. Sullivan." "Isaiah, and yes, madam, I suppose I am." He tipped his hat. "I'll head back to my camp now, but you know where to find me if you need anything else." He rode away before she could formulate a response, leaving her standing by her bullpen with a tangle of emotions she didn't quite know how to process. Gratitude was in there, certainly, but also irritation at needing help in the first place, and beneath that, something warmer and more dangerous that she wasn't ready to examine too closely. That evening, after she'd finished her chores and eaten a solitary dinner of beans and cornbread, Hannah found herself looking toward the creek where she knew Isaiah was camped. She could see the faint glow of his fire in the gathering darkness, a small point of light in the vast emptiness of the desert night. It occurred to her that, for the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel quite so alone. The thought should have frightened her. Instead, it settled somewhere in her chest like a warm stone and refused to move. The next morning, Hannah baked 2 extra pieces of cornbread with her breakfast and wrapped them in a clean cloth. She told herself it was simple courtesy, repayment for the help with the bull. She told herself it didn't mean anything beyond that. Isaiah was watering his horse when she rode into his camp. He looked up, surprise and pleasure flickering across his face in quick succession. "Morning," he said. "Morning." Hannah dismounted and held out the wrapped cornbread. "Figured you might be getting tired of hardtack and whatever game you're catching." He took the offering with a smile that did strange things to her equilibrium. "That's kind of you, though I have to say, I make a pretty decent rabbit stew if you ever want to try it. Maybe." Hannah shifted her weight, suddenly uncertain. That was a strange thing for me to say yesterday, about not being able to do it alone. I just meant. I know what you meant, Isaiah interrupted gently. And for what it's worth, there's no shame in accepting help when it makes sense. Being independent doesn't mean doing everything the hard way just to prove you can. My father would have said the same thing. He sounds like a wise man. He was. Hannah looked toward the mountains, her throat tight with old grief. He died 3 years ago. Kicked by a horse he was trying to break. One minute he was fine, the next he was gone. He left me this ranch and the understanding that people would try to take it from me one way or another. That's why I'm careful about accepting help. It always comes with strings. Not from me. Isaiah's voice was quiet but firm. I've got no interest in your land, Miss Garrett. I've got no plans to trick you or manipulate you into anything. I'm just a man who's drawn to a strong woman and smart enough to know that pushing where I'm not wanted is the fastest way to stay unwanted. Hannah looked at him then, really looked at him. He was younger than she'd initially thought, probably no more than 25 to her own 23 years. His face was honest, open in a way that men's faces rarely were in her experience. And his eyes held hers without wavering, letting her see that he meant what he said. Why me? She asked. You could find work anywhere, court any number of women who'd be far less complicated. Complicated is interesting, he grinned. Besides, I don't want any number of women. I want to get to know you. You don't even know me. Not yet, but I'd like to if you'll let me. Hannah should have said no. Should have mounted her horse and ridden away and kept the walls she'd built firmly in place. But something in his words, in the patient way he'd waited and the respectful way he'd helped, made her want to take a chance she hadn't taken in a very long time. I check my cattle every afternoon around 3, she said. It's hot work and I could use someone to watch for strays while I count. If you're still here tomorrow, you could ride along, just to help. Nothing more than that. Isaiah's face lit up like she'd offered him a fortune in gold instead of an afternoon of dusty ranch work. I'll be there. And this doesn't mean anything, Hannah added quickly. Just that I'm willing to see if we can work together without driving each other crazy. Understood, madam. She rode away before she could change her mind, but she caught herself smiling as her property came into view. It was a small smile, cautious and uncertain, but it was there nonetheless. True to his word, Isaiah appeared at her ranch the next afternoon just before 3. He'd cleaned up, she noticed, and his shirt looked freshly washed. The observation made something flutter in her chest, but she pushed it down and focused on the work ahead. They rode out to check her herd together, falling into an easy rhythm as they counted heads and looked for any signs of injury or illness. Isaiah proved himself useful and knowledgeable, asking intelligent questions about her breeding program and offering observations that showed he understood cattle better than most. But more than that, he was good company. He had stories from his travels, tales of different ranches and strange characters that made her laugh despite herself. You really worked for a man who thought he could train his cattle to come when he whistled? Hannah asked, genuinely amused. Cross my heart. He spent 6 months trying before he finally accepted it wasn't going to happen, lost half his herd to wandering before he gave up and hired actual cowboys to round them up like normal people. Isaiah shook his head, grinning at the memory. He was a nice man, just had more optimism than sense. Where was this? Montana Territory, couple years back. Beautiful country up there, but cold. I'm more suited to places where you don't have to worry about freezing to death 6 months out of the year. They finished the count as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that made the desert look almost soft. Hannah felt more relaxed than she had in months, the constant tension she carried in her shoulders eased by an afternoon of companionship and shared work. "Thank you for letting me help," Isaiah said as they rode back toward her ranch house. "I know it wasn't easy for you to ask." "I'm starting to think it might not be as dangerous as I thought," Hannah admitted. "Letting someone help, I mean. Only dangerous if the someone has bad intentions. Mine are strictly honorable, I promise. Define honorable." Isaiah reined in his horse and looked at her directly. "I want to spend time with you. I want to help you with your ranch. I want to make you laugh and see you smile more often, because you have a beautiful smile and it's a shame you don't use it more. Eventually, if you're willing, I'd like to court you properly. But all of that happens on your timeline and your terms. I'm not going anywhere, Hannah. Not unless you tell me to go." It was the first time he'd used her given name, and the sound of it in his voice did something to her resolve. Hannah swallowed hard, caught between the fear that had kept her safe and the longing for connection that she'd been suppressing for 3 lonely years. "I don't know if I'm ready for courting," she said honestly. "I don't know if I even know how anymore." "That's all right. We can figure it out together, or not at all if you'd rather. There's no pressure, Hannah. I just wanted you to know where I stand." They reached her ranch house as twilight settled over the land. Hannah dismounted and stood there for a moment, her hand on her mare's neck, gathering her courage. "Would you like to stay for dinner?" The words came out in a rush. "It won't be anything fancy, just stew and biscuits, but it seems foolish for you to ride back to your camp when there's food here and you helped me all afternoon." The smile that spread across Isaiah's face was worth every bit of risk the invitation represented. "I would like that very much." They settled into a routine after that, tentative at first but gradually becoming more natural. Isaiah would show up most afternoons to help with ranch work, and more often than not, Hannah would invite him to stay for dinner. They'd eat together on her small porch, watching the sunset and talking about everything from cattle breeding to favorite books to the childhoods that had shaped them into who they were. Hannah learned that Isaiah had grown up in Colorado, the youngest of 4 brothers in a ranching family. He'd left home at 18 to see more of the West, working his way through various territories and learning different aspects of ranch life. He'd never stayed anywhere long, always feeling like he was searching for something he couldn't quite name. "Until I rode up and saw you shoot that rattlesnake," he said one evening as they sat together after a long day of mending fence posts. "Then I knew what I'd been looking for, someone who didn't need me but might choose me anyway." Hannah felt her cheeks warm, but she didn't look away from his gaze. "I'm not good at this, at letting people in. After my father died, I had to be so hard just to survive. I had men trying to buy my land for half its value, neighbors suggesting I should marry for protection, even a few who tried more aggressive approaches until they learned I could shoot as well as any man. Being soft seemed like a luxury I couldn't afford." "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met," Isaiah said softly. "But strength doesn't mean you have to be alone. It just means you get to choose who stands beside you." "And if I chose you?" The question escaped before Hannah could stop it, vulnerable and dangerous in the evening air. "Then I'd consider myself the luckiest man in Texas. But that's your choice to make, Hannah. No pressure, no expectations. I'm happy right where I am." But Hannah was beginning to realize she wasn't happy with things as they were. The more time she spent with Isaiah, the more she wanted. She wanted his laugh first thing in the morning over coffee. She wanted his solid presence beside her, not just for afternoon ranch work, but for all the small moments that made up a life. She wanted to kiss him, to know what his hands would feel like in her hair and his heart beating beneath her palm. The realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. Things shifted on a particularly brutal afternoon in late July. The heat was oppressive, the kind that made it hard to breathe and turned the world into a wavering mirage. Hannah and Isaiah were working together to move her small herd to a different pasture where the grazing was better, when 3 riders appeared on the horizon. Hannah tensed immediately. She recognized the lead rider as Carl Drummond, a rancher whose land bordered hers to the north. He'd made several offers to buy her out over the years, each one more insulting than the last. The 2 men flanking him were strangers, but they had the look of hired guns, all swagger and poorly concealed weapons. "Miss Garrett," Drummond said, tipping his hat but not dismounting. "Working hard as always, I see. What do you want, Drummond?" Hannah kept her voice level, but her hand drifted toward the rifle in her saddle scabbard. "Just thought I'd ride by with one more offer. I'm prepared to pay you $800 for your land and livestock." "That's more than fair for a property this size, especially considering how hard you have to work it alone." "It's worth twice that, and you know it. The answer is the same as it's always been." "No." Drummond's affable expression hardened. "Now see, that's just stubborn. A woman alone out here, it's not natural. Something bad could happen. Fences could get cut, cattle could wander off, maybe even a barn could catch fire. Be a shame if you lost everything because you were too proud to accept a generous offer." Isaiah moved his horse closer to Hannah's, a subtle shift that nonetheless positioned him between her and Drummond's men. "The lady said no, seems clear enough to me. And who are you?" Drummond's eyes narrowed. "New husband or just new help?" "I'm someone who believes a person has a right to their property without being threatened," Isaiah said calmly. "And I'm someone who doesn't take kindly to bullies." One of Drummond's men moved his hand toward his gun, but Isaiah didn't flinch. He just sat there, relaxed but ready, his eyes steady on Drummond. "You're making a mistake, Garrett," Drummond said, wheeling his horse around. "One way or another, I'll have this land. Think about that next time something goes wrong out here." They rode away in a cloud of dust, leaving Hannah shaking with a combination of anger and fear. She dealt with Drummond's threats before, but never this direct, never this ominous. "Are you all right?" Isaiah asked, his voice gentle. "No." Hannah dismounted abruptly, needing solid ground beneath her feet. "This is what I was afraid of. This is why I can't afford to be soft or vulnerable. Men like Drummond see any weakness as an opportunity. Having someone who cares about you isn't weakness." Isaiah dismounted and came to stand beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth in the brutal afternoon heat. "It's strength, Hannah. It means you don't have to face men like that alone. But what if something happens to you because of me? Because you chose to stay and help?" The fear broke through her carefully maintained control, raw and real. "I can't be responsible for that." Isaiah reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand in his. His palm was calloused and warm, his grip gentle but firm. "You're not responsible for what bad men choose to do, and I'm capable of making my own decisions about risk. I know what I'm taking on by staying here, and I'm choosing to stay anyway." Hannah looked down at their joined hands, feeling something crack in the armor she'd built around her heart. "I'm frightened," she whispered. "I've been alone for so long, and now you're here, and I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything except let yourself feel what you feel. The rest will work itself out." Isaiah squeezed her hand gently. "But I think we need to report Drummond's threats to the marshal in town. Make sure there's an official record of what he said." They rode into Presidio together that evening, the small town dusty and tired in the fading light. The marshal, a grizzled man named Tom Fletcher, took their statement seriously and promised to keep an eye on Drummond's activities. But he was also honest about the limitations of frontier justice. "I can't arrest a man for making threats, not without more proof," Fletcher said. "But I'll make sure he knows I'm watching. Sometimes that's enough to keep the wolves at bay." On the ride back to Hannah's ranch, Isaiah was quiet, thoughtful in a way that made her nervous. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking I should move my camp onto your property. That way I'm closer if Drummond tries anything." Hannah's heart stuttered. "That's a big step." "Not as big as you think. I'd still have my own camp, my own space, but I'd be near enough to help if you needed me. And maybe—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Maybe it's time to stop pretending this is just about helping with ranch work. I care about you, Hannah. I think you might care about me too. And if that's true, then there's no reason for me to be sleeping a quarter-mile away when I could be somewhere I could actually do some good if trouble came calling." They'd reached her ranch house, the familiar outline dark against the star-filled sky. Hannah dismounted and stood there, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Letting Isaiah move his camp onto her property was more than just practical. It was a declaration, an acknowledgement of what was growing between them. It meant letting go of the last vestiges of her carefully maintained independence and admitting she wanted him there, not just for protection but for companionship, for connection, for all the things she'd told herself she didn't need. "All right," she said finally. "There's a spot near the barn with good shelter. You can set up there." Isaiah's smile was like sunrise, bright and full of promise. "Thank you, Hannah." That night, after Isaiah had moved his few possessions to the new campsite and Hannah had retreated to her small house, she lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of her ranch. But now there was something new, something added to the symphony of wind and cattle and distant coyotes. The quiet sounds of Isaiah settling in, the low murmur of his voice as he spoke to his horse, the peaceful presence of someone who had chosen to stay not because he thought she needed rescuing, but because he wanted to be near her. Hannah smiled into the darkness, and finally, for the first time in 3 years, felt like she might be home. The days that followed were some of the best of Hannah's life. Having Isaiah nearby changed everything and nothing at the same time. She was still the one making decisions about her ranch, still the one doing the hard work that came with managing land in an unforgiving climate. But now she had a partner in the truest sense, someone who worked beside her without trying to work over her, who respected her knowledge and experience while sharing his own. They fell into new rhythms together. Morning coffee shared on her porch while they planned the day's work. Long afternoons of labor under the relentless sun, made bearable by easy conversation and shared laughter. Evenings spent over dinner, talking about dreams and fears and all the small details that made up a life. And slowly, carefully, they grew closer in other ways. A hand held while walking back from checking the cattle. A touch lingering on a shoulder or arm, sitting near enough that their knees touched while they watched the sunset. Each small gesture was a step toward something bigger, something Hannah had stopped believing she could have. 3 weeks after Isaiah moved his camp onto her property, Hannah finally gathered her courage. They were sitting together after dinner, the evening air finally cooling to something almost comfortable, when she turned to him and said, "I've been thinking." "About what?" Isaiah's voice was warm, patient as always. "About what you said, about courting." Hannah took a breath. "I think I'd like that if the offer still stands." The joy that spread across Isaiah's face made her heart swell. "The offer will always stand for as long as you want it." "I'm still scared," she admitted. "I'm still worried about what letting you in means, what I might lose if this doesn't work out. That's the risk of caring about anyone." Isaiah reached over and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "But I promise you this, Hannah Garrett. I will never try to take your independence from you. I will never try to control your land or your life. I'm here because I choose to be, and I want you to choose me too. Not because you need me, but because you want me. There's a difference." "I do want you," Hannah said softly. That's what scares me most." Isaiah raised her hand to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then let's be scared together and see what happens." Their courtship was unlike anything Hannah had imagined. Isaiah courted her with wildflowers picked from the desert, with help mending her most stubborn fence line, with stories told under the stars and laughter shared over burnt biscuits she tried to make from a new recipe. He courted her with respect and patience, never pushing for more than she was ready to give, always letting her set the pace. And Hannah found herself opening like a flower toward the sun. She let him see her fears and her dreams. She shared stories about her father and the loneliness that had marked the years since his death. She even admitted, one quiet evening, that she thought she might have to marry someone she didn't love just to keep her ranch safe, and how much that possibility had haunted her. "You'll never have to do that," Isaiah said fiercely. "We'll find a way to deal with Drummond or anyone else who threatens you, but you'll do it on your terms, Hannah. Always on your terms." True to his word, Drummond tried twice more to cause trouble. Once, they found a section of fence cut and several head of cattle wandering onto federal land. Another time, someone took shots at Hannah's water tank, putting holes in the metal that needed expensive repairs. Each time, Isaiah was there, helping to fix the damage and standing watch through the night to make sure nothing else happened. And each time, they reported it to Marshal Fletcher, building a record of harassment even if they couldn't prove Drummond was behind it. Through it all, their relationship deepened. Hannah had never imagined she could feel this way about anyone, this combination of desire and respect and genuine friendship. Isaiah made her laugh and think and want. She caught herself watching him work, admiring the strength in his shoulders and the competence in his hands. She found excuses to touch him, to stand close enough that she could smell the scent of sun and horse and leather that clung to him, and she could tell he felt the same. The way his eyes would track her movements when he thought she wasn't looking, the catch in his breath when she brushed past him, the careful control he maintained, always letting her lead, never taking more than she offered. It was maddening and wonderful in equal measure. The breakthrough came on a September evening when the heat had finally broken and the air carried the first hints of autumn. They'd spent the day working together to prepare for winter, checking the barn roof and making sure the water system was secure. Now they sat together on her porch, closer than usual, his arm resting along the back of her chair. "Isaiah," Hannah said, her heart pounding, "I want to kiss you." He turned to look at her, his eyes dark in the fading light. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure," she was. Despite all her fears and reservations, she was absolutely certain. "Is that all right, Hannah? You can kiss me any time you want, for as long as you want." His voice was rough with barely suppressed longing. "I've been waiting for you to be ready." She leaned in slowly, giving him time to meet her halfway. When their lips touched, it was gentle at first, exploratory. But then Isaiah's hand came up to cup her face and Hannah sighed against his mouth, and the kiss deepened into something that felt like coming home and starting an adventure all at the same time. When they finally pulled apart, Hannah was breathless and smiling. "That was nice. Nice." Isaiah laughed, his forehead resting against hers. "I'm going to have to try harder if all I get is nice." "You can try as hard as you want," Hannah said, emboldened by desire and the security of knowing he would respect her limits. "I'm not going anywhere." They kissed again, longer this time, and Hannah felt years of loneliness and fear melting away under the warmth of Isaiah's affection. This was what she'd been missing, what she'd been too frightened to reach for. Not rescue from her circumstances, but partnership with someone who valued her exactly as she was. The weeks that followed were a revelation. Hannah had never considered herself a romantic person, but with Isaiah, she discovered a capacity for tenderness and passion she hadn't known she possessed. They stole kisses while working, held hands while planning, and spent long evenings wrapped in each other's arms on the porch swing Isaiah had built and installed as a surprise. "I love you," Isaiah said one night, the words falling into the darkness like stones dropped into still water. "I think I've loved you since I saw you standing there with that dead snake, looking like you could take on the world single-handed." Hannah's throat tightened with emotion. She'd never said these words to anyone except her father, and that had been a different kind of love entirely. But she knew what she felt, bone deep and certain. "I love you too," she whispered. "You're stubborn and persistent, and you wouldn't leave me alone even when I told you to, and somehow that's exactly what I needed." Isaiah kissed her then, deep and thorough, and Hannah felt the last of her walls crumble away. October brought cooler weather and a development that changed everything. Marshal Fletcher rode out to Hannah's ranch with news that Carl Drummond had been arrested. Apparently, Drummond had made the mistake of trying to intimidate a widow in town, using the same tactics he'd employed against Hannah. But this widow's son was a Texas Ranger, and he'd taken a very dim view of threats against his mother. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of harassment and property damage that included several incidents on Hannah's land. "He's looking at serious jail time," Fletcher said, accepting the coffee Hannah offered. "And without him pushing, I suspect his sons will be more interested in running their own ranch than trying to grab yours." After Fletcher left, Hannah stood on her porch and felt a weight she'd been carrying for years finally lift. The threat that had loomed over her independence was gone. She was safe. Her ranch was safe. And more than that, she had Isaiah beside her, solid and real and completely hers. "What are you thinking?" Isaiah asked, coming to stand beside her. "I'm thinking about the future," Hannah said. "About what I want that future to look like. And what do you want?" She turned to face him, taking both his hands in hers. "I want you, not just as someone who helps with the ranch or someone who camps nearby. I want you here permanently. I want to wake up beside you and fall asleep in your arms. I want to build a life together, not just as partners but as husband and wife." Isaiah's eyes widened. "Hannah, are you proposing?" "Yes, I suppose I am," she laughed, giddy with her own boldness. "I know it's not traditional for the woman to ask, but nothing about us has been traditional. So what do you say, Isaiah Sullivan? Will you marry me?" For answer, Isaiah swept her into his arms and kissed her until they were both breathless. When he finally set her down, his eyes were bright with unshed tears of joy. "Yes," he said simply. "1,000 times yes. I'll marry you, Hannah Garrett, and I'll count myself blessed every day of my life." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Presidio. Hannah wore her mother's wedding dress, carefully preserved in a trunk, and Isaiah wore a new suit purchased for the occasion. Marshal Fletcher served as witness, along with several townspeople who'd come to respect Hannah's determination and independence over the years. Standing before the circuit preacher who passed through once a month, Hannah felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. Joy. The certainty that her future would be better than her past. Not because she was being rescued, but because she'd chosen to let someone share the journey. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Isaiah kissed her, Hannah kissed him back with all the love and promise she felt in her heart. This was right. This was what she wanted. Not rescue, but partnership. Not salvation, but love. They spent their wedding night in Hannah's small house, which was now their house, learning each other in ways that were both new and somehow familiar. Isaiah was gentle and patient, making sure Hannah felt safe and cherished even in their most intimate moments. And Hannah discovered that surrendering to love didn't make her weak. If anything, it made her stronger, because now she had someone to be strong for beyond just herself. The year that followed their marriage was marked by hard work, deep satisfaction, and growing prosperity. With two people fully committed to the ranch, they were able to expand their herd and improve their infrastructure. Isaiah's experience with different ranching techniques, combined with Hannah's intimate knowledge of her land, proved to be a powerful combination. They built a small addition onto the house, giving them more space and comfort. They bought another horse and a wagon that made trips to town easier. But more than the material improvements, their marriage was marked by genuine happiness. They laughed together, worked together, and discovered that the passion between them only grew stronger with time. Isaiah never tried to take over or diminish Hannah's role in running the ranch. Instead, he supported her decisions while offering his own input, and together they made choices that benefited them both. The townspeople, who had initially been skeptical of Hannah's ability to maintain her independence, came to respect the partnership she and Isaiah had forged. It wasn't unusual for other ranchers to ask their advice, or for young couples to mention them as an example of how a marriage could work when both partners brought strength to the table. In the spring of 1886, Hannah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of emotions. Joy, certainly, at the prospect of a child created from love, but also fear, remembering how her own mother had died in childbirth when Hannah was just 10 years old. Isaiah held her while she cried, stroking her hair and murmuring reassurances. "We'll get through this together," he promised. "I'll be with you every step of the way, and we'll make sure you have the best care available." True to his word, Isaiah arranged for a midwife from El Paso to come stay with them for the last month of Hannah's pregnancy. Mrs. Rodriguez was an experienced woman who delivered hundreds of babies, and her calm competence eased much of Hannah's fear. Isaiah, meanwhile, hovered protectively, insisting Hannah rest more and let him take on the heavier ranch work. "I'm pregnant, not an invalid," Hannah protested, though she was secretly touched by his concern. "I know that, but humor me. I love you too much to take any chances." Isaiah kissed her forehead. "Besides, this gives me an excuse to prove I really have been paying attention all these years. I can run this ranch as well as you can." "Almost as well," Hannah corrected, but she was smiling. Their son was born on a cool November evening, arriving after 12 hours of labor that left Hannah exhausted but triumphant. Isaiah was there for all of it, holding her hand and wiping her forehead, offering encouragement when she was certain she couldn't go on. When Mrs. Rodriguez finally placed the squalling infant in Hannah's arms, Hannah looked down at his red face and felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. "He's perfect," she whispered. "He is," Isaiah agreed, his voice thick with emotion. He reached out to touch his son's tiny hand, and the baby immediately gripped his finger with surprising strength. "He's got your determination already." They named him Samuel, after Hannah's father, and called him Sam. Isaiah wrote to his family in Colorado with the news, and a month later a package arrived containing baby clothes hand-sewn by his mother and sisters, along with a letter welcoming Hannah to the family and expressing hope they might visit once Sam was old enough to travel. Parenthood brought new challenges and new joys. Sam was a robust baby with healthy lungs and an apparent need to be held constantly. Hannah and Isaiah took turns walking the floor with him during fussy nights and learned to function on far less sleep than they'd thought possible. But watching Sam grow and change, seeing Isaiah's gentle patience with their son, made every exhausting moment worthwhile. The ranch continued to prosper, with Isaiah managing most of the day-to-day operations while Hannah focused on Sam. They still managed to grow their herd and even hire on 2 ranch hands to help with the busiest seasons. The additional help meant Isaiah could spend more time with his wife and son, something he considered more valuable than any amount of money. Sam's first year passed in a blur of milestones and small miracles. His first smile, directed at his father during a diaper change. His first laugh, triggered by a silly face Hannah made while trying to feed him mashed peas. His first word, which was "Mama" to Hannah's delight and Isaiah's mock dismay. "I spend all day talking to him and I get nothing," Isaiah complained without any real heat. "You walk in the room and immediately it's Mama this and Mama that." "That's because I'm his favorite," Hannah teased, bouncing Sam on her hip. "You'll just have to accept being second best." But then Sam reached for Isaiah, saying "Dada" clear as day, and Isaiah's face lit up like Christmas morning. He took his son in his arms and spun him around, making Sam shriek with laughter, and Hannah felt her heart could barely contain all the love she felt for her family. They celebrated Sam's first birthday with a small party at the ranch, inviting a few neighboring families and Marshall Fletcher, who'd become something of a friend over the years. Hannah baked a cake using her mother's recipe, and Sam smashed his slice with enthusiastic joy, getting more frosting in his hair than in his mouth. "This is a good life," Isaiah said that evening after Sam had been put to bed, and they sat together on their porch swing, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Sometimes I think about that day I rode up and saw you shoot that rattlesnake, and I can hardly believe how lucky I got." "I'm the lucky one," Hannah said, leaning against his shoulder. "You stayed even when I told you to go. You were stubborn enough to wait until I was ready to let you in. Well, you were worth waiting for, worth everything." Isaiah kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Hannah Sullivan." "I love you too." Hannah tilted her face up for a proper kiss, which Isaiah was happy to provide. "Thank you for not rescuing me. Thank you for not needing to be rescued. Made everything so much more interesting." They sat together as darkness fell, comfortable in the silence and in each other's company. The ranch spread around them, the land Hannah had fought to keep, and the home they'd built together. In the distance, cattle lowed softly and a coyote called to the rising moon. It was the sound of the West, wild and beautiful and unforgiving, but Hannah didn't mind. She had everything she needed right here. The years continued to unfold in a pattern of work and love and steady growth. When Sam was 3, Hannah became pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more excitement, though Isaiah still fussed over her and insisted she take it easy. Their daughter arrived in early spring of 1889, a tiny thing with Hannah's dark hair and Isaiah's gray-blue eyes. They named her Catherine Rose after both their mothers, and called her Katie. Sam was fascinated by his little sister, wanting to help with everything from changing her diapers to choosing her clothes. With 2 children and a thriving ranch, life was busier than ever. But it was also richer, fuller, marked by the kind of deep contentment that Hannah had never imagined possible during those lonely years when she'd worked the land alone. She'd built something lasting, not just in terms of property and prosperity, but in the family she and Isaiah had created together. Isaiah's family finally made the journey from Colorado when Katie was 6 months old. Hannah had been nervous about meeting his parents and brothers, worried they might judge her for the unconventional way she and Isaiah had met, or resent her for taking him so far from home. But Isaiah's mother, Ellen, embraced Hannah like a daughter from the moment they met. "Thank you for loving my son," Ellen said quietly while they were preparing dinner together, "and for letting him love you. Isaiah wrote about how independent you were, how you didn't need rescuing, and I thought, good. That's exactly the kind of woman he needs. Someone strong enough to stand beside him, not behind him, The visit lasted 2 weeks, filled with stories and laughter and the comfortable chaos that came with extended family. Isaiah's brothers were charmed by Hannah and delighted with their nephew and niece. His father spent hours talking ranch management with both Hannah and Isaiah, clearly impressed by what they'd accomplished. "You've built something special here," Isaiah's father said on their last evening. "Not just a successful ranch, but a real partnership. That's rarer than you might think." After they left, Hannah felt more connected to Isaiah's past and more secure in their future. She wasn't just Hannah Garrett Sullivan, the woman rancher of Presidio County. She was part of something bigger, a family that stretched across territories and decades. The children grew, and with them, the ranch evolved. Sam showed an early aptitude for working with horses, spending hours in the barn with his father learning to train and care for the animals. Katie was more interested in the business side, asking endless questions about money and trade that made both her parents laugh. "She's going to run the whole operation someday," Isaiah predicted when Katie was 7 and had just negotiated with a ranch hand to trade her dessert for his help mucking out stalls. "She's got your head for business and my charm. Dangerous combination." "God help whoever tries to get the better of her in a deal," Hannah agreed fondly. In 1892, when Sam was 6 and Katie was 3, the railroad finally extended a line through Presidio County. The arrival of the railroad changed everything, making it easier to ship cattle to market and bringing new settlers to the area. Some of the old-timers lamented the changes, but Hannah saw opportunity. With better transportation, they could expand their operation and reach markets that had previously been too distant to be practical. She and Isaiah carefully planned their expansion, taking on more land and building new facilities. They hired additional help and began breeding horses in addition to cattle, capitalizing on the growing demand for quality mounts. The ranch that Hannah had inherited as a struggling operation became one of the most successful in the county. But success didn't change the fundamentals of their relationship. Hannah and Isaiah remained partners in every sense, making decisions together and supporting each other through challenges and triumphs alike. They still sat together on their porch in the evenings, still found time for stolen kisses in the barn, still looked at each other with the kind of love that deepened rather than diminished with time. When Sam turned 16 in 1900, he announced his intention to attend agricultural college in El Paso. Hannah's first instinct was to protest, to keep her son close where she could protect him. But Isaiah pointed out gently that letting children grow into their own people was part of loving them well. "He'll come back," Isaiah assured her. "This land is in his blood, same as it's in yours, but he needs to learn and grow and figure out who he is beyond being our son." Isaiah was right. Sam went to school and thrived, coming home during breaks full of new ideas and techniques that he was eager to implement. And when he graduated 3 years later, he returned to the ranch with a degree, a wealth of knowledge, and a quiet young woman named Elizabeth who became his wife within the year. Katie followed a different path. At 18, she announced her intention to open a business in town, buying and selling cattle and horses for ranchers who didn't want to make the trip to larger markets themselves. It was an audacious idea for a young woman in 1905, but Hannah and Isaiah had raised their daughter to be bold. They backed her venture with financial support and advice, watching with pride as Katie built a successful business through sheer determination and sharp intelligence. Within 2 years, she'd expanded to include equipment sales and had become an influential figure in the local ranching community. "She's so much like you," Isaiah told Hannah one evening as they watched Katie negotiate a complex three-way trade that left everyone involved feeling like they'd gotten the better deal. Strong, smart, absolutely refusing to let anyone tell her what she can't do. She's like both of us, Hannah corrected. She's got your way with people, that charm that makes them want to work with her even when she's driving a hard bargain. The years accumulated like layers of sediment, each one adding depth and richness to their story. Hannah's hair turned gray at the temples, then fully silver. Isaiah's face gained lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun and smiling at his wife. Their bodies ached more in the morning, moved a bit slower through the day, but their love remained vibrant and alive. They celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary in 1910, with a party that brought together family from 3 territories and friends from throughout Presidio County. Sam and Elizabeth had given them 2 grandchildren by then, robust boys who showed early signs of their grandfather's way with horses. Katie was courting a lawyer from El Paso, a smart man who respected her independence and seemed genuinely awed by her business acumen. Standing in the barn they decorated for the party, surrounded by everyone they loved, Hannah looked at Isaiah and felt the same flutter in her chest she'd felt that first day he'd ridden up to her property. He caught her looking and winked, that familiar smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "No regrets?" he asked later when the party had wound down and they were alone. "Not a single one," Hannah said honestly. "Well, maybe I regret telling you to leave that first day. Think of all the time we wasted." "Wasn't wasted. You needed to come to me on your own terms in your own time." "That's what made it right." Isaiah pulled her close, swaying slightly to music only they could hear. "Besides, I wasn't going anywhere. You could have told me to leave 100 times and I still would have stayed, just in case you changed your mind." "I know. That's what made me fall in love with you. You were stubborn enough to wait for me to be ready." They danced together in the empty barn, 2 people who'd found each other against the odds and built something lasting from hard work, respect, and love. Outside, the Texas night spread vast and star-filled over the land Hannah had fought to keep and Isaiah had chosen to share. It was a good life, rich and full and exactly what they'd both needed. Katie married her lawyer in 1912, and 2 years later presented Hannah and Isaiah with twin granddaughters who had Katie's determination and their father's calm temperament. Sam and Elizabeth added a daughter to their family, a quiet girl who loved books as much as horses. The ranch house, expanded multiple times over the years, rang with the laughter of grandchildren during holidays and summer visits. Hannah and Isaiah gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the ranch, letting Sam take on more responsibility while they focused on the consulting and advisory role that came with experience. But they still rode out together most mornings, checking fence lines and cattle more from habit than necessity, enjoying the quiet companionship that had sustained them through decades of partnership. "You ever think about that day?" Hannah asked one morning as they sat their horses overlooking the valley where her small, struggling ranch had once stood. Now, it was part of a thriving operation that stretched for miles, supporting not just their immediate family but several ranch hands and their families as well. "The day you rode up and I shot that rattlesnake. All the time," Isaiah admitted. "I think about how scared I was that you'd send me away permanently, and how determined I was to stay anyway because I knew, somehow I just knew, that you were meant to be mine and I was meant to be yours. I thought you were the most arrogant man I'd ever met. I was arrogant, but I was also right." Isaiah grinned at her, still handsome despite the silver in his hair and the weathering of years. "Admit it, you're glad I stayed." "I'm glad you stayed," Hannah agreed softly. I'm glad you saw past my fear and anger to the person underneath. I'm glad you were patient enough to wait until I was ready. I'm glad for every single day we've had together. Even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. Those are the days that proved what we had was real. They rode back to the ranch house as the sun climbed higher. Two people who'd grown old together without growing apart. That evening, surrounded by family at dinner, Hannah looked around the table and felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what she'd fought for, what she'd struggled to maintain through those lonely years after her father's death. Not just land or prosperity, but the freedom to choose her own path and build the life she wanted. And Isaiah, stubborn, patient, loving Isaiah, had waited just beyond her property line until she was ready to let him in. He hadn't tried to rescue her, hadn't tried to take over or diminish her strength. He'd simply stayed, offering help without demanding control, giving love without expecting submission. That night, lying in bed beside her husband of 40 years, Hannah whispered, "Thank you." Isaiah, who'd been drifting off to sleep, stirred and pulled her closer. For what? For staying. For waiting. For loving me enough to let me come to you in my own time. Best decision I ever made, Isaiah murmured, pressing a kiss to her forehead. You were worth waiting for, Hannah Sullivan. You still are. They drifted off to sleep together, hands linked beneath the covers. Two people who'd found in each other exactly what they needed. Not rescue, but partnership. Not salvation, but love. And that made all the difference. The years continued their steady march. Hannah and Isaiah watched their grandchildren grow, attended weddings and celebrated births. They saw the Wild West they'd known gradually transform into something more settled and civilized. Automobiles replaced horses on the roads, though they stubbornly kept riding. Electricity came to Presidio, bringing lights that made the stars less visible but the work easier. The world changed around them, but their love remained constant. In the spring of 1925, Hannah and Isaiah celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. The party was smaller this time, just immediate family, because neither of them had the energy for large gatherings anymore. But it was perfect in its intimacy, filled with stories and laughter and the kind of easy affection that came from decades of shared life. Sam, now a respected rancher in his own right with silver threading through his dark hair, stood to make a toast. "To my parents," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "who taught me that true partnership means respecting each other's strength, supporting each other's dreams, and never giving up even when the world tells you to. You built something beautiful together, not just this ranch but a life and a legacy that will continue for generations. We're all blessed to be part of it." Katie, elegant and successful with her own grown children, added, "And you taught me that being a strong woman doesn't mean being alone. It means finding someone strong enough to stand beside you rather than in front of you. Thank you for showing me what real love looks like." Hannah felt tears slide down her weathered cheeks, but they were good tears, happy ones. She looked at Isaiah and saw his eyes were wet too. They'd done it. They'd built a life worth living, raised children who understood the value of partnership and respect, created a legacy that would endure. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you too," Isaiah replied. "Every single day more than the day before." They were both slowing down now, their bodies finally catching up to their ages. Hannah was 73, Isaiah 75. They still rode together when their joints allowed it, still sat on their porch swing in the evenings, still found comfort and joy in each other's presence. The ranch was fully in Sam's capable hands now, with Katie's business savvy providing additional support. Hannah and Isaiah were free to simply enjoy the fruits of their decades of labor. On a warm evening in June of 1926, Exactly 42 years after they'd met, Hannah and Isaiah sat together on their porch watching the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink that made the desert look soft and welcoming, the opposite of its harsh reality. But Hannah had long ago learned that the desert, like most things worth having, revealed its beauty to those patient enough to look. "What are you thinking about?" Isaiah asked, his hand warm in hers. "Everything," Hannah said. "That first day when you rode up and I was so determined to send you away. All the days after when you just stayed, quiet and patient, waiting for me to be ready. The moment I finally let myself admit I loved you, our wedding, our children, our grandchildren, all of it. Any regrets?" "Just one," Hannah said, squeezing his hand. "I wish I'd said yes sooner. Wish I'd wasted less time being afraid." "It wasn't wasted time. It was necessary time. You needed to know that I wasn't going to try to take over your life or diminish who you were. You needed to choose me freely, not out of fear or necessity, but because you genuinely wanted me there. I did want you there. I do want you here. Always." Isaiah leaned over and kissed her, gentle and sweet, a kiss that spoke of 42 years of love and partnership and unwavering commitment. When they pulled apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "You know what the best part was?" he asked. "What?" "You didn't need rescuing. You never did. You were perfectly capable of handling everything life threw at you. But you chose to let me help anyway, chose to share your life with me even though you didn't need to. That's the greatest gift anyone has ever given me, being chosen, not needed, wanted, not required." Hannah felt fresh tears prick her eyes. "That's the most romantic thing you've ever said to me." "I've been saving it." Isaiah smiled, that familiar expression that still made her heart flutter after all these years. "Figured after 42 years together, I should probably tell you what it meant to me that you were strong enough to stand alone but chose to stand beside me instead." They sat together as darkness fell, comfortable in the silence and in each other's company. Inside the house, they could hear Sam and Elizabeth preparing dinner, could hear the distant laughter of grandchildren playing in the yard. The ranch spread around them, the land Hannah had fought to keep and the home they'd built together. It was perfect. It was enough. It was everything. "Thank you for staying," Hannah whispered into the twilight. "Thank you for being stubborn enough to wait until I was ready. Thank you for being strong enough not to need me but wise enough to want me anyway," Isaiah replied. "That's all I ever wanted, to be wanted, not needed, to be chosen, not required. You gave me that, Hannah. You gave me everything." They sat together on their porch swing, two people who'd found each other in the vast emptiness of the Texas desert and built a life worth living. The stars began to appear overhead, the same stars that had watched over them for more than 4 decades. And beneath those stars, Garrett Sullivan and Isaiah Sullivan held hands and counted their blessings, grateful for every stubborn, patient, love-filled moment they'd been given. The Wild West they'd known was gone, transformed into something more settled and civilized. But the love they'd built endured, a testament to the power of patience, respect, and the willingness to be vulnerable with another person. Hannah hadn't needed rescuing, and she'd told Isaiah so. But he'd stayed anyway, just in case she changed her mind. And in staying, in respecting her strength while offering his own, he'd won not just her hand but her heart. It was the greatest love story Hannah had ever known, made all the sweeter because it was her own. And as she sat there beside Isaiah, watching the stars emerge one by one from the darkening sky, she knew that she would carry this love with her for as long as she lived. It was her treasure, her triumph, her proof that sometimes the best things in life came not from being rescued, but from finding someone strong enough to stand beside you through everything the world could throw your way. "I love you," she said one more time, because it never got old and always mattered. I love you too, Isaiah replied, until the end of time and beyond. And there on their porch, in the home they'd built, and the life they'd created, two people who'd chosen each other freely and loved each other completely settled into the peaceful contentment that came from a life well lived, and a love that would endure long after they were gone. The legacy they'd created would continue through their children and grandchildren, a testament to what could be built when two strong people chose partnership over pride, love over fear, and togetherness over loneliness. Hannah Garrett had never needed rescuing, and she'd made that abundantly clear to Isaiah Sullivan from the very first moment they met. But Isaiah had stayed anyway, patient and stubborn and absolutely certain that she was worth waiting for. And in the end, they'd both been right. Hannah didn't need rescuing. What she needed, what they both needed, was exactly what they'd found in each other: love, respect, partnership, and the kind of deep connection that made every day worth living. It was, Hannah reflected as she drifted off to sleep that night in Isaiah's arms, the perfect ending to a perfectly imperfect love story. One that had started with a woman who didn't need saving and a cowboy stubborn enough to stay anyway, just in case she changed her mind. She never had needed saving, but she'd chosen him regardless, and that made all the difference. Their story became legend in Presidio County, told and retold by generations of their descendants. The story of Hannah Garrett, who'd fought to keep her ranch alone, and Isaiah Sullivan, who'd camped just beyond her property line, waiting with endless patience for her to be ready. Who'd respected her enough not to push, and loved her enough to stay. Who'd built a life and a legacy that proved love didn't require rescuing. Just two people strong enough to be vulnerable with each other, and wise enough to choose partnership over pride. It was a love story for the ages, made all the more powerful because it was true.